Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today what I thought I would do with this video is sort of just go through equipment that I still have but I'm no longer using. This is sort of like a bit of a journey through this audio hobby, how I got to where I'm currently at with the equipment that I'm using and the things that I've had in my system in the past that I used, but I've upgraded. And for whatever reason, some of this gear I just didn't sell. I still have it. And so I thought I'd just go through sort of just a little video on, what I still own and a little explanation as to why it's no longer a part of my audio journey. So right now, I think I'd start with this item. This is a Jolita 502 BRC integrated amplifier. It is a tube design, as you can clearly see. Its output power is about, I think, 65 watts a channel, if I'm not mistaken. It has four 6550 power tubes and then the four signal tubes. These are actually new old stock Telefunken signal tubes that I put in here, 12AX7 and 12AT7s. The original power tubes were made by Tungsol. One of them burned out and I replaced them with Svetlana tubes. These are made by Svetlana. So basically it weighs about 48, maybe almost close to 50 pounds. It's a heavy integrated amp. The transformers are up underneath this. The design is very similar to what you would have seen on something like an old Harman Kardon Citation 2 power amplifier, this type of platform. So what it has is a little power switch here that was so incredibly bright, this blue LED would blind you at night, so I put a little felt cover over it to diminish that. And then this is the remote control sensor. It has the little gold badge, Jolita. Home theater bypass switch. This is the volume control knob and the input selector. It's stated as having auxiliary, CD, DVD, and XLR. So I've always kind of found that the switches on here were really sort of cheap, And this amp is not high-end by any stretch of the imagination. I think this would just be basically, I would consider it just hi-fi. At the time, I was using a pair of clip speakers, and this drove the clip speakers very easily. But when I moved into a pair of Magnepan 1.7s, the amp with only 65 watts was woefully underpowered to be able to drive speakers like the Maggies, which are such a difficult load, that I wound up having to get some additional help, and that was in the form of a pair of Musical Fidelity 550K superchargers. And since the Magnepans are a true 4-ohm load speaker, the 550Ks were producing about 750 watts of power. That really got those speakers up, I can tell you that. But the downside to it is everything ran so hot, it was just crazy. I mean, crazy hot. I lived with it for about 6 years, I think, and finally decided it was time to move on. That's when I bought the Macintosh MA8000, and then the Magnepans, I wound up selling them. They're just not a terribly dynamic speaker as far as I'm concerned, and imaging is always an issue with them. They soundstage great, but the imaging is just a little bit lacking, and they don't really image well, and they're not a dynamic speaker as far as I'm concerned. So the drawbacks on the speaker were finally just started weighing on me, and it was time to move on. And when I moved on and went with the Macintosh and a different pair of speakers, this became basically sort of obsolete. Has a little solid aluminum remote control. It just does standby, volume up, volume down, and mute. It's very basic. And then on the back side, let me take a look over here. It has one set of XLR inputs rather, and then the DVD, CD, auxiliary, the bypass. These are the RCA. It did have fixed and variable outputs, so that was important when I was running subwoofers in the back behind the Magnepans to help, flesh out the low bass. I used them on these, and then it has 4-ohm and 8-ohm taps, and then the common here, a ground for whatever reason. This doesn't have a phono stage on it, so you can't use a turntable with that. I actually, when I did have my first Technics turntable and a moving magnet a phono cartridge, I wound up getting this. Is the Volare VP130. It's a little moving magnet phono stage. Not bad. I put another Telefunken signal tube in there. What I like about the Telefunkens is that they have more treble air, more sparkle on top than some other brands. I also have several of the RCA black plates, which are great in the mid-range, but they're rolled off on the highs. And the state of my hearing these days, I need all the help I can get. All right, so this is the Jolita 502 BRC. When I went to a moving coil cartridge, the Volare was no longer sustainable, and I wound up getting another phono stage, and that is going to be the next item. Okay, so when I went with a moving coil cartridge, which was the Denon DL304, with an exceedingly low output moving coil, the Volare was no longer usable for me, and its replacement was another Jolita product, and this is the JD9 tube phono stage. It's really basic, pretty simple, nothing more than a power switch in the front, another infernally bright, blinding LED that I had to cover, and then inside it's got two tubes, and let me see if I can spin this thing around the back. It's pretty basic. It's got a ground connection, it's got inputs, low output, high output, power, and then this plate, if you can see that, behind that plate is the dip switches where you select between a moving magnet or moving coil, and then the settings, the capacitance settings, picofarads for the moving for the moving magnet, and then the resistance. All of this is, you set that in there with just these little switches up and down for the resistance, ohms of resistance for the moving coil. This is a decent phono stage. I mean, it's not bad. I always found it to be a little bit noisy. It wasn't quite as quiet as what I was hoping for. So when I got the Macintosh, which has a really nice built-in phono stage, this became superfluous as well, and I didn't need it any longer. I used it for a while in a second system, along with the Jolita, which is sitting over there, the other one, the integrated. But since that time, I've taken all that down, and it's just sits in a cabinet, unused temporarily. It's good to have it though, in case something happens and I need a backup, I have it. So that is the Jolita JD9 phono stage. Okay, so during the time that I had the Jolita musical fidelity Magnepan system up and running, I also had and used this Marantz model 2240B stereo receiver, primarily just for the FM tuner. This actually has an excellent FM tuner and AM/FM tuner, and it's in perfect condition. This thing plays so nicely. I actually used it in my my home office for a while, just to listen to it during the day while I was working. Very, very nice sounding. Kind of a fat sound. It's just really, it's just kind of robust. It's very warm. It's almost tubey in type. This is basically just a throwback to the heyday of Marantz. I mean, this was back in the mid 1970s. Marantz made a series of just beautiful, beautiful stereo receivers. I'm fortunate to have this one. It's got all of these input selections: AM, FM, phono, auxiliary, tape 1, tape 2. Well, that's something you don't see these days, is tape. Also has a tape loop here where you can actually monitor recordings in real time. Got a Dolby FM, a mono switch, FM muting. This is the balance that you can go from one channel to the next. Loudness, low pass, high filter, and then the main output. This is the little sync. This wheel is so smooth. It's just such a nice feel to it. Yeah, they just don't make them like this anymore. They really don't. And I've seen You know, these things on eBay and elsewhere that get kind of crazy expensive. If you're in a market to buying something like this, though, you really do need to be careful with what you're getting. The backside of it is just total old school. You know, I mean, these old speakers, main and remote speakers, push buttons. You need to basically just use straight wire in them. You know, and then the single-ended inputs, outputs, pre-out. They have a pre-out, you know, and all. And then antenna. This is the AM antenna. This thing right there. Very nice. Very, very nice. Really wish that I listened to FM radio a little bit more than I do. But I mean, with all the streaming services now and Sirius satellite radio, and it's the day for this has just passed. And I actually understand in some European countries, I know in Norway for sure, they've discontinued that. You can't even get FM reception over there now. So you know, that may be the future. Who can tell? At any rate, I had this in the system. I used to listen to it mostly like on weekends, that type of thing. If I was just doing something and wanted the radio in the background, I used this one, and it's a beauty. All right, let's move on to the next. All right, so this is my Pioneer RT707 open reel tape deck. You know, when I was a young guy in my 20s, and this was a model that was in current production back in those days, I fawned over one of these things. I wanted one so badly. But they were, even in that, you know, in 1977, 78, they were upwards of almost $800, and that was just a little bit out of my range. But I have been having this one for quite some time now. It's been probably 15 years, and it's in really good shape. It plays really, really well. I've never sent it up to my tech to have it calibrated or checked, you know, just to see, make sure it's all within factory specifications, because it's just always played well. But I probably will wind up doing that. I'll probably send it up to him while he's still around and still capable, and Pioneer parts and stuff are still available, just to have it, you know, put into tip-top condition, which, as far as I'm concerned, it really already is. But just to kind of go through it, this is the power switch here. This is the speed between 3 3/4 and 7.5 inches per second. That is the line source button. If you're recording, you know, you're going to press it in and to tape. And then the bias adjustments for low and high, and then the recording levels, as this is the input mode. You have to press those both in if you're going to be recording, all right? So on this side, it has a headphone jack, 2 microphone jacks, and then, hope you can see this, this would be the adjustment for the gain on the microphones if you were using microphones. And if you were recording, you know, through like RCA, this is the line for it. Obviously the VU meters, this is the tape counter, this is the repeat button. So this does automatic reverse, okay? And if you want to, you know, have it set to where it will reverse automatically, you just keep that pressed in. Has a pitch control, and then over here are the solenoids for, you know, the play. It's play, stop, fast forward, rewind, pause, and then a record button here if you're going to do that. And then this is an arrow, a green arrow. This one would face in that direction. That's the forward speed direction. This one goes the other way, and that's the reverse direction. It's very heavy, man. This thing, I'm winded just from carrying it in here. It actually has been hooked up in my living room, and I had been using it very, very occasionally, almost never, with my headphone amp. I just don't listen to headphones very much. I have one. It's only rare, maybe late at night or something, that I'm in the mood to listen to headphones, and this has been hooked up, and actually after I'm finished shooting this video, I have to bring it back in and reconnect it, so that's going to be fun. So let's take a look around the backside of it. It's really straightforward, very simple. It does have an output, an AC outlet here that if you can plug another component in, power cord. This is the DIN, a German setting for in and out play. This is the input output, and then you have output levels that you can control. Like I said, pretty straightforward, not really a whole lot of complicated matters to deal with that. When I was in the Jolita Musical Fidelity Magnapan, I had this set up in there, and I used to listen to it quite a bit. But since so much of the system has changed over the years, this sort of just got shuffled out. I'm using the TAC and the Tascam, the big open reel decks, instead of this. So the next thing I'm going to show, I'm actually not taking this tape deck out because I want to show you what I used to do with it. So hang on, I'll be right back. All right, so in conjunction with using the Pioneer, I also have this Technics, it's the SH-8020 stereo frequency equalizer, typically known as a graphic equalizer. And it was just fun to have, you know, it's got a little power switch, you flip it on, and then these are the frequency controls that you can up and down. Across the front there are these settings, these different buttons for recording and so forth. You know, a lot of people say that, you know, well, a graphic equalizer is nothing more than just a box that introduces distortion into your system. And in a lot of cases, that's absolutely the truth, especially when you're dealing with cheap graphic equalizers, and there's a lot of them out there. Even today, they still make a bunch of those. But this is made by Technics, and Technics is a legitimate, they make good stuff. And the signal to noise ratio in this unit, I think, is something like an astounding 107 dBs. It's very high signal to noise ratio, so there's no distortion, introduced into this. It was just fun to have it. You know, all of these little red lights in here when it's powered on, all of these light up, and it was just cool looking. And you know, you can turn it to flat. You don't have to have it on where it's actually doing anything. Or if you got a recording that you're not really satisfied with how it's sounding, you can make some adjustments to it. You know, so. I'm glad to have it. You know, these things are getting harder to find for reasonable prices, and I've had this for probably, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years. You know, I actually opened it up, and I was astonished at how pristine the interior of it was. All the circuits, it almost smelled like it was new. You know, it was really amazing. So, so that's it. That is my Pioneer RT 707/Technics SH-8020 combo. And let me get now to the very last of it, and I'll be right back. All right, and this is the last of it. And so before I go on, I have to say that, you know, if you've managed to make it this far into this video, well, why don't you hit that like button and subscribe? I would appreciate it greatly, because there will be other content coming up, and hope to try to make it at least somewhat interesting. So thank you for that. This is, man, when I first saw this cassette deck at the dealer all turned on and lit up, it was like, you know, I saw my first Datsun 240Z or something. I was just fawned over it. I was in love with it. I just dreamed about it. I had to have it, and finally it took a couple of months, but I was able to finally bring it home. This one goes back to the early days when I had my first, what I considered, serious stereo system. And that consisted of an Akai AM2800 integrated amp. It's matching, I think it was the AT2600 tuner. And I had a Pioneer PL518 turntable and a pair of Pioneer CS99A speakers and this. So I was, you know, used to like to carry tapes back in those days. You know, you use cassettes in your car, and so this was really, really good to have. And I listened to this has been well used. So just real quick, the same thing. It's got two mic inputs. If you want to, you know, put microphones, you got those. Headphones right here. This is the switch between the line and the mic. Input level adjustments, and then it has a system called ANRS, which I guess was JVC's. And if I didn't mention, this is a JVC KD-85 cassette deck. ANRS was there, sort of like their Dolby noise reduction, I guess a competitor to Dolby. And then, of course, it had the equalizer, the bias, and this turned on this spectrometer. It's a little red LEDs, and you know, when the cassette is playing, they just light up all over the place. Super cool looking. Obviously, the meters had a really, really nice color to them as well. And then, you know, you got your record equalizer, output level. And one of the things that I really liked about this thing, and I just loved it so much, is that these solenoid switches were so precise and so light to the touch. It was just a beautiful system. It really, 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 really was. You know, the door had that damping to it, and then it had a light behind it here in there. You can kind of see that. Tape counter had a memory switch, and then obviously the power. So all in all, you know, this was my baby. You know, I just love this thing. I'm never getting rid of it. It's picked up a speed problem. I'm not really sure exactly what was wrong with it. I actually opened it up and changed the belt to it, and it seemed to fix it for a while, but then the speed issue returned, and maybe the belt was just really not the right size. So, you know, I guess it's possible I could probably send this to someone who could really go through it and get it running again. But, you know, the idea that I would listen to cassette tapes these days is just not going to happen. So it's really not worth it. But I'll always have it. It sits in a rack here in the room, and every once in a while I look at it and just reminisce back to when I had brown hair instead of all this gray hair. So there we have it. That is my quick tour through the old equipment that I no longer use. Like I said, please give us a like, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you again soon.